going on, everybody? Welcome back to the YouTube channel. My name is Hoffman. It's good to be back here. It's been a while since we've done one of these, so let's do a mini review and a quick thoughts for Final Fantasy 16. If you've never seen one of these on the channel, this isn't like an in-depth thing. These aren't perfect thoughts about how I feel about the game. They're just kind of things I recently finished up the game, and I want to put these down and get them out there before I forget about them, and then have a conversation with you guys about what you guys thought about the game. So Final Fantasy 16, let's get into it. Let's start with the graphics and the sound, the presentation of the game. Visually, this game is one of the best games I've ever played visually. It has some of the, not just like technically, let's start technically first. It is astounding, the colors and how vivid everything is. They use a lot of desaturated colors in the back, so the magic really pops. Some of the most fidelity I've ever seen, like hair, eyelashes, eyeballs. It was crazy how good this game looked just running around. And I'm an old school Final Fantasy player all the way back until, on the NES. And of course, when they started making the jump over to 3D, and we started getting the first 3D cutscenes, to go from there all the way to Final Fantasy 16, where we are now, it is so impressive. And just the team over there at Square Enix who works on this is just, they blow me away. They blew me away this entire game, all the way from the technical part all the way to the kind of conceptualization of it. There's a hard word because I'm dumb. Just the art direction of the game, how all of these summons looked, how all the characters looked, how the world looked. Everything about that was so unique to itself. Final Fantasy kind of has this idea of what it kind of knows what it is, where it takes these classical ideas of what it is to be a fantasy thing, and they turn it up in this ornate way. Of course, all like the mana and the crystals and jewels, it just feels like Final Fantasy when you're in it. And just the scope of the battles and like the world, when you go from big huge monsters on the ground, and then you're going all the way out to outer space, but everything still feels like it's proportional but like massive. It was so cool to see, man. Definitely my favorite graphics I've ever had, and probably my favorite world I've ever lived in with Final Fantasy in terms of how everything looked. Talking about the sound real quick. You didn't get the classic feel about Final Fantasy. They kind of threw it in here and there for the boss battles, but where they really excelled with that classic feel is what they did with like the classic Final Fantasy melodies, and the way they kind of matured them a little bit, made them a little bit more dramatic and adult themed, almost more melancholy at times. It just felt so good. The soundtrack for this game blew me away. I could listen to the Final Fantasy stuff over and over, and it's impressive that they took something that was so old, like the main Final Fantasy theme, and they still find a way to make it unique and new to itself. Big fan of the sound of this game, and I'm going to listen to the soundtrack while I'm working and doing art and stuff on my own time. It's that good. It's fantastic. Let's talk about the story real quick. The story of the game, you follow Clive, who is really one of my favorite protagonists of the Final Fantasy games. He's right up there with Cloud and Squall for me. I really enjoyed his family bonds, how much he cared about the people around him. And let's talk about that real quick, the family bonds. This is not something that they normally do in Final Fantasy game. Normally, like, the protagonist doesn't have a ton of connections outside of maybe in Final Fantasy X. What's that guy's name? Oh man, with the blonde hair. I'm going to forget it. So they don't normally have a huge amount of ties to the world or to the characters in the world being the main protagonist. Cloud really comes in from the outside. Squall really comes in from the outside. It's just kind of part of it. And in this game, everything is so connected to itself. It really feels like this kind of Game of Thrones vibe, where the main character is part of this family, and this family just had a whole bunch of infighting. There's backstabbing, and then how they interact with other families and empires, kingdoms, whatever you want to call it. I thought it was a great way for Final Fantasy to go, and it's something I was really excited for. This game definitely feels more mature as a Final Fantasy game than, say, Final Fantasy like 9, which wasn't too mature, even 11. This game really takes it to a part where it almost feels like an Elden Ring meets Game of Thrones, with like a Final Fantasy like mana and crystals thrown on top of it. I really enjoyed the story. All the way to where, we take on the main boss, Ultima, who is one of my favorite final bosses in any RPG. I thought the way he manipulated characters, the way he had his kind of like underbosses working for him was great. His motives were fantastic. Huge fan of Ultima. Overall, my favorite Final Fantasy story I think I've experienced since 8. 8 is my favorite Final Fantasy story, and this one is right up there. I think surpassing it. And again, it's just the more mature nature of it. It really learned the lessons the last couple of years of storytelling were like the zeitgeist of what people like to enjoy for their entertainment. They played in Final Fantasy. It was awesome. Let's move on to the gameplay. Kind of the most hotly contested part of the gameplay is that it moved to a more action-based game. A lot of people comparing it to something like Devil May Cry. I really don't think that they achieved the level of fun that like a Devil May Cry has. At times, I felt like the combat system was like really convoluted, and the controls would get a little bit jumbled, having to swap through so many different styles, and then never feeling like I really had too many abilities. I just wasn't the biggest fan of the action combat. Not to say like it was bad, it just wasn't for me. It was really, I appreciate the new approach to Final Fantasy they're taking. This is the 16th game. I'm not looking for a turn-based. I just wish it was more in line with something more like the Final Fantasy VII reboots, where you're still controlling the team. You still have a little bit of a turn-based. You're waiting on abilities and stuff for your party. I like that team-based aspect of the game, and you just don't get that in this. You just get this kind of like single-player experience, which doesn't feel like Final Fantasy to me. But I still respect them for going out there and trying something new. And a new aspect of it. I saw an article that said God of War had more of an RPG element to it than Final Fantasy. I don't know if I agree with that, but it's still, it's fun. I had fun playing it. I just kind of wish it was more of the classic Final Fantasy feel. I do like turn-based games still. And so I think that they nailed it on Final Fantasy VII's reboot with how this system should work. And I feel like if we had something more in line with that, it would have been a lot better. I also never felt like I was really building a character. Of course you're spending stuff on abilities, and you got this like kind of, hey, put this new chest piece on, but it just never felt like I was upgrading a whole like suite for a character. I don't know what it was about it, but just equipping, the crafting system was weak, equipping a sword, equipping accessories, which I never really swapped out that much. I just never got that RPG vibe that you're picking up items in the world and applying them to your character. Everything just felt kind of a little bit too more linear, and not like there was a lot of creativity. You couldn't really come up with your own builds, and it was just kind of straightforward. And maybe that was just my playthrough. Maybe if I go back and I play it again, I'll see that I could have gone down a whole nother path with my equipment and stuff. But after my first playthrough, it just felt way too linear. Overall, I'm going to give this game a 8 out of 10. I absolutely adored this game. Possibly my game of the year, just because of the scale of it, the scope of it, how much I enjoyed it. I put 36 hours into it, and I've liked it better than anything else I've played. But we got like Starfield and stuff coming out, so I'm going to reserve the game of the year until we get a lot of the more releases. 8 out of 10 though. The graphics were fantastic, sound was great, story was amazing. Just the gameplay didn't do it for me overall, especially when it comes back to the gameplay. I felt like I watched this game a lot more than I got to play it, and I don't think they found the balance on that. That's why it really drove it down to an 8. It's because I wanted to play the game more, and I felt it was just a cutscene heavy game. It's a little bit too much, even for Final Fantasy. All right, so that's my rating. That's my mini review of it and quick thoughts. If you guys want to have more discussion down in the little comment section below, I'm down for that. If you guys made it this far in the video, I appreciate it. Make sure you drop a follow, a like on the video to do all that stuff. Next up, we got a Droz, an indie game that we're playing, and then we also have Chained Echoes coming up here on the channel, so keep an eye out for those, all right? All right, thanks everybody. You guys have a good one.